Greetings and salutations, listener. It is I, Eric J. Chucky, joined, as always, by the boy.
Hey.
This is the Two Nerds Podcast, and as promised last week, today we're here to talk about something that we give a shit more about.
Yeah.
Goblinoids.
We're gonna just do, like, the first goblinoid that shows up on the list. Bugbear. But then I realized that, if I'm being perfectly honest, I don't have 30 minutes of shit to say about Bugbear. But if we look at all the goblinoid races together and how they can be used together to make an interesting sort of subsection of a setting, or be used in contrast one another when you're playing them, that might be more interesting to talk about. At least that was what I thought.
Not me. And that echoes my sentiments. I'm fully kidding. Ironically, because you don't listen to them, a similar situation came up on WebDM. And if you don't watch / listen to WebDM, they have run a better show than we do.
It's like this, but like good though?
Yeah, there's cameras and cuts and less flatulence, not none. Certainly none of them have ever sneezed violently and
then said, I'll edit it out, and then didn't edit it out.
I think we've crossed into the point where fewer people have watched that episode than people have watched episodes where we talk about that episode.
Good.
So go back through our history, give a bunch of watches, hit a bunch of likes. Head to that description and go to the Patreon and, support us if you like us. If you don't like us, let us know in the comments section.
Yeah, it's also good for the algorithm, so, scream at us, call us dumb, whatever.
Yeah. Share the video with your friends if you don't have any money, because, that's what does the thing in the end. This is just kind of our dealie. We don't make cash off of it.
Not really, no. This is just for good fun times.
Yeah. But ironically, there was a similar situation there where one of the two gentlemen on the show had a very integrated idea of the Goblinoids, whereas the other one did not so much. And they did a Goblinoid episode because of it. So, let's start with you, because I feel like you're going to have more to say, or maybe yours fits together anyway. So let's roll your ideas at me.
Okay. I like to... It's not necessarily like that as a DM I use goblinoids together, like, to such a degree that where you see goblins, you will always see hobgoblins and so on and so forth. But I like to think about the races sort of as being linked, as being part of one overall race, kind of like your elf equivalents.
Okay.
I like it because it allows them to it allows them to each fill a niche that otherwise is filled by a different race, and thus renders them somewhat extraneous, I suppose is the easiest way to explain it.
Well, from a monster standpoint, and this is purely from like an enemy standpoint, we want to have a variety of small annoying things. Your goblins, your kobolds, your there's another one I'm forgetting off the top of my head. But that way your adventurers aren't always fighting exactly the same monsters at level 1.
You want to have a variety of small things which go squish when hit with large things.
Yes.
And that's fair, but I like the idea of goblins and hobgoblins and bugbears being their own thing, like David S. Pumpkin style.
Okay.
You'll notice, actually, although you only ever played a goblin, goblins, hobgoblins, and bugbears were all sort of clumped together in the D&D setting I'm running right now. Most of the goblins were on this one Madagascar-style, like, big island. Most of the hobgoblins and bugbears were either there or very nearby on the surrounding continents, with sprinklings of them elsewhere throughout the setting, as I tend to do. Because I like the idea of goblinoids all sort of being variants on the same base race, Because goblins are small-sized, and they are the small, annoying little assholes. But both hobgoblins and bugbears are medium-sized. Hobgoblins being like the warrior race, and then bugbears being the... Bugbears in 5e are a study in contrast, because they are simultaneously the big guy and also the sneaky one, which is odd.
I mean, not necessarily. A lot of ambush predators are large.
Yeah, I'm not saying it doesn't make sense. It's just from a D&D race perspective, it's not what you expect to see.
Yeah, I guess from your typical tropes, and in that way, I kind of like the design difference. I remember looking over Volo's guide the first time and going, "Oh, well, that's neat."
Yeah, because they're big and they have powerful build and they're at base much heavier, and like the suggested weight is much heavier. They're big and brawny and long limbed, but also they're sneaky. They're naturally stealthy and they get extra sneak attack damage on when they manage to ambush somebody. So they are like a big ambush predator. Whereas a hobgoblin is much more the human style persistence predator, where they're lean and fit and they have like a very rigid code. Mm-hmm. And then goblins gotta be smart to get ahead.
Depends on your goblin specifically, but so we don't have as strong of a format for the race episodes as we do for the class ones, in case you guys are just joining us. So there are a few questions we want to tackle. What do you like about these races?
I'll go individually and then together.
Okay.
Individually, I like goblins having a chip on their shoulder about being wee, in a way that halflings and gnomes really don't by base, at least in the terms of the base fluff, and I carry that over. Halflings and gnomes don't typically have a chip on their shoulder about being small. Goblins do.
In very much exactly the way I typically dislike.
Yeah.
I believe there's a legendary quote of mine that brings you much mirth.
If you'll provide it to the nice people.
I'm fine, thanks.
You sure?
I'm positive.
Okay.
I believe we covered it in either the halfling or the gnome episode.
I like that they have a chip on their shoulder because it's important to have a small race that is a little bitter about it. That's a fun trope. And having a race that plays into that, especially as a part of the larger tapestry of the Goblinoids, where their two bigger brothers probably pick on them, as it were, it works. For hobgoblins, I really like Proud Warrior race guy, just sort of in general. Mm-hmm. And that plus also kind of a dickhead, like your Star Wars, the original series, Star Trek, the original series, Klingon style warrior race, but also dickheads. That's a good version of that. So many of the Proud Warrior race D&D races, like your Dragonborn and such, are very noble and very, upstanding, and they have a rigid code of honor, and by that I mean, like, they are honorable. Whereas hobgoblins very much give off, they have a rigid code of honor. By that I mean they have a very specific set of rules they follow. Whether or not you think it's honorable does not matter to them.
Yeah, I find that's pretty standard for your more noble war races. And Hobgoblin's a nice difference. I'm going to basically cover everything I have to say about Hobgoblin in one fell swoop here. There was some art back in 2nd or 3rd edition that made them look very Mongolian in their dress and their, armor and weaponry. And that hasn't detached itself from my head. So I really see them as a very proud and scrappy steppes people who are inclined toward battle, conquering, and being nomads. And I think it fits really cool. I think I really enjoy the very clear air of, I care about my personal code, but I don't give a shit about what you consider to be the right thing to do. Mm-hmm. Whereas most of the other warrior races are also try and be like good people in addition to being honorable. Very mercenary, but
not like principle-less.
Right. Not the chaotics, definitely.
Yeah.
Like neutral.
I would not play a chaotic aligned hobgoblin. I just wouldn't. That's lawful something in my head. For bugbears, I kind of, with them being the big ambush predator, I like the idea of them being more rare than the other two, but like they're the big motherfuckers. They're the ones that, like, they have a cave troll.
Yeah. I think they each have really unique sets of traits to bring with them into making character for a race, I like that they're very diverse. And in that sense, I question why they're all linked. I mean, hobgoblin and goblin, fair enough. One is the other's name with hob. Bugbears,
I think in in some version of a D&D setting, they all have the same creator deity.
basically, or they're somehow linked in some way. I get that. I just, they're so very different. Like, we don't call, I suppose we call elves and dwarves humanoids, but so are goblins.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't necessarily say like elves and dwarves, but like of the various different kinds of elf.
Sure.
Is how I see them related.
Or compared humans to tieflings and...
Yeah, humans and tieflings and Aasimar.
Yeah. Not that I have a problem with them being linked at all. I mean, it's fine. It's not necessarily what I would do. I see this bundle of stats you've given me in this vague description, and my mind goes to different places. But
that's absolutely fair. I can totally see not wanting to use them as like a little triumvirate. I totally get that because
Sure.
they are very different races.
Yeah. Goblins is the hardest for me personally.
Not me. I just steal WoW goblins.
Well, and that's basically what I've ended up doing, because that's what my players have wanted to play, those who have touched the goblins, but
It's like the best version of goblins.
I mean, they're fun. It's a good version of goblins. I don't long for the days of little yippy monstrosities. I mean, you can still do that with WoW goblins. These goblins are barbarians. There you go. Done.
Yeah.
I've just never had occasion to concretely set them up in my worlds. And the one time I did was after that there had already been established that there were WoW-style goblins in the world. So I use those kind of goblins. I don't know. That's interesting. Hobgoblins, obviously, I covered. But I ran a build for an experiment, a potential future series, we'll see. Making Final Fantasy VI characters in Dungeons & Dragons rules. And for Umaro, the Yeti, the best race I could find for him was a bugbear.
That makes sense. Big, strong, long-ass limbs.
Yeah. And they're described as having more body hair. They've got those weird little animal noses, and
They do kind of have, like what's the fucking ice yeti that Luke Skywalker kills?
like a wampa.
Yeah, I thought it was Wampa. They have big Wampa energy.
Yeah. They could really work as like a mundane kind of Sasquatch. And I'm not saying I'm not going to call my bugbears bugbears. They're Sasquatches. No, bugbear's a great name. But like, I could definitely...
It's a weird name, but
sure. It's a fine name. It's a cromulent name.
Like for me, if I was gonna use if I was gonna use them separate from their fellows as their own like individual sort of deal, I would really lean into the skid and describe them as looking and acting like fucking bears,
Sure.
but like bugs,
like ape bears.
like bugs. I would literally describe them as like semi-chitinous and scaly with like multifaceted eyes, so that you could look at it and go, "Oh, bugbear," and it would make sense.
When you take the name and make a creature out of that, I've seen some really interesting stuff done with it. There's a web comic whose name escapes me off the top of my head, and I always think it's three different things that it's not. But they did something with bugbears where they look like bears, but they have like cartoon Halloween powers. They can summon insects and become spooky, and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, you can do something like that.
Yeah, I enjoyed that. Bugbear, for the uninitiated at home, I know you know this, but comes originally from the phrases like bugaboo, and the old one, not the one from the late 90s, early 2000s, that's like the boogeyman. They have a similar etymological origin.
Which is why I imagine they have sneaky powers.
Sure, yeah.
Because the boogeyman, he's coming to get you.
Sure. So, like, as much as that's really great, because I made a race in one of my games that could be described as a bugbear, but I don't, because I try to have historical, logical consistency as much as I can, and that's not how that would work.
That's not how that race would have ended up being called.
Right. They were bugbears before bugs were bugs, basically. In D&D, yeah, that's awesome. Like, in the vein of an owlbear, some fucking ape roaches, some bear roaches.
Like,
just
make them a
in the
sentient
woods.
race, but, like, give them big wampa energy, make them
Yeah.
dickhead Sasquatches who are just big, bear-sized fucking roaches in terms of appearance. Bugbear.
Yeah,
If I was going to use them separate from their fellows, that's what I would do.
I've got some good visuals in my head, like a lanky, spikeless Rammus from League of Legends.
Yeah, basically, yes.
Yeah.
With
but-
the big, long arms.
I feel like coming from the idea of, when I sit down and go, okay, I need to make a character out of this. What the fuck is a bugbear? How do I make a bugbear? Who are they? Beyond dumb brute. If I come from the idea of, all right, let's say this is a race of Sasquatches, I have more ideas then.
Yeah.
That helps me a lot in making the race.
Whereas for me, I don't need... Like, the Sasquatch thing's a great idea, but I use them as part of the overall sort of goblinoid society.
Sure.
I don't think of them as dumb. They're like Gork and Mork.
Yeah, they're canny.
It's brutally cunning or cunningly brutal. Like...
Well, and we haven't quite gotten to this point yet. I'll elaborate more on it later, but the conceptual space that orcs used to occupy in my head for Dungeons and Dragons has basically been split between bugbears and hobgoblins and Goliaths now. I've got 3 ready-made archetypes for what an orc used to be for me.
Like if you want the what crawls along the walls in the Mines of Moria, those are gobos. Those are clearly goblins. Maybe hobgoblins for the big boys. If you want the fucking mighty Urukai, that's where you use bugbears and bigger hobgoblins, like a mixture of those two. And if you want like the noble orc that we have been using for like the tribal sort of barbarian race, the orc who's not like an inherent monster, well, that's just Goliath.
Yeah.
They just made Goliath for that. Which kind of leaves orc in the dust, but we'll get there.
Well, I think that's kind of interesting, to go to orcs with. And I think it's a fun way to return to the idea of, these savage creatures. There wasn't a great space for those racial attributes to be assigned previously. Like those cultural attributes, I should say. Racial attributes implies mechanics. Now that there are, the orc could theoretically be your, servants of Sauron, as opposed to just some people out there.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily know that I would do that.
I know I wouldn't.
Because I don't like doing this race is evil. Even with my demons, I'm like,
I'm perfectly happy doing this race is evil. I'm perfectly happy doing this race is just fundamentally made of a certain percentage of evilum, and there might be exceptions, but they are in large dickheads, like demons and devils. But for one of the mortal races, basically anything that in my setting, in the way I DM, I would describe as having free will. I don't like having them have predestined, like, certain ways they lean, that makes sense culturally or, racially, because some of those races are created by a deity, so they would have certain ways they lean and naturally sort of think. I don't like having them have predestined, like, this race is always evil, unless they are literally made of evilum, the universal force that powers evil, like demons and devils.
We talked a little bit about, ways we like to use the goblinoids, things we like about them. Is there something you don't like about them?
I don't like that they are, unless you go out of your way to do something like I do and give them their own carved out niche, their own space to play, I don't like that they are essentially fairly redundant. There isn't, in the same way that they can fill the space left by orcs are a better known race than hobgoblins and bugbears, and they can fill the space that those two fill much more with a much more sort of versatility.
I will say, however, that at least mechanically speaking, they've got an interesting set of traits.
That's really useful for making characters, and because of how I DM, if you're going to make a character of that race, that gives me much more of a reason to put them in the setting. So I like that, but they're so redundant thematically,
right? Unless
Unless you go out of your way to give them their own space, and I don't like that really.
Yeah, it's. I mean, we've come so long, and we've said this before. That we've got these ideas within Dungeons and Dragons that were originally intended to just be monstrous races that people have come to be interested in since. X is cool, I'd like to play X. This art is evocative for me in a way that makes me want to run a character like that. Let me run a character like that. So we go back and we have and add all these new races, and sometimes, like Orc and Goliath, they occupy enough of a similar space that you, even mechanically, that they're super redundant. Whereas
They
this one
just
is
sort
more
of end up a
thematic.
coin toss from one another.
Yeah. How does this fit into your world? And then that can be difficult for you or anyone as a DM who is, has a group of players who come to the table and says, all right, I want to play an orc, I want to play a hobgoblin, I want to play a bugbear. And you're going, I got to fit all these guys in here. Well, at least no one's playing a Goliath. And then your other friend kicks in the door and goes, I'm playing a Goliath.
Ugh, whatever, fine. You guys are part of a frat house. I'm done with that. But I mean, you're right. Like, as an example, not of these races, but a similar sort of problem I ran into. I really like the race Gnolls. Not as much as you, but I like that race. I also very much enjoy a race I stole from Jim Butcher's Codex Alera called the Canon. They operate in very similar thematic spaces, so I had to really go out of my way to give the Gnolls a space to be, because I had made the canon much more central in the setting.
I think that's interesting because specifically the Gnolls you used in this campaign, if I recall, are similar to the Gnolls you used in the last fantasy campaign you ran, which they're more wild and opportunistic and eat people.
They're dickhead canon.
Yeah, sure. They remind me of something, and it's not coming to me off the top of my head. And I think it portrays them really well. Now, don't get me wrong. I'd rather have a race of Gnolls that isn't entirely evil. Wizards of the Coast.
And notably, mine isn't either. They're
No.
just violent pragmatists.
Yeah.
They're the furry version of lizard folk.
I was about to say exactly the same thing.
I mean that they have fur. Both lizard folk and gnolls are furries. Come at me, Scalies.
I think geographic separation is good too, because you could argue that your canon are pretty similar to orcs in terms of functionality, but they're separated by oceans.
Yeah.
So the orcs are over here doing their orky thing. They've got their own set of cultural signifiers and visuals and fabrics and whatever. They grew up in a different place, and the canon grew up in a different place.
And that's what you kind of have to do for goblinoids to give them any room. Is the point I was trying to make.
Sure.
And that's frustrating as a DM because it makes it more of a pain in the ass if someone wants to play one of those.
Now, we've already mentioned WebDM on here, so I'm going to bring up this question to you because you don't know. One of the ideas put out was, and I don't personally care for this, but I'm curious to your reaction on it, that because of them being connected to the Feywild, goblins start as goblins, and when they get important and strong enough, they become hobgoblins.
Okay, yeah, I could see that. Like if I was using a version, I'm not, and I don't know that I might. That definitely tracks with that would make them fairies in my brain. That would make them the Fey.
Yeah.
And you've seen me do that before with Fey races. When they get more important, they get physically bigger. Mm-hmm. And that's basically what that is, and I totally like that idea.
Okay, cool, interesting. I'm not so hot on it personally. I don't like to
Force mechanical changes upon a player.
Basically is what it comes down to, or even identity changes. Now, a player might be into it, and if they came to me with this idea, I might be willing to roll with it. But I would hate to go, oh gosh, you guys have been adventuring in-game for 20 years now. You're a hobgoblin.
Yeah, I know that fucks your build-up, but deal with it. If I did that, and if I wanted to do that, and I wouldn't mind it, it would essentially be the kind of track I would use if someone wanted to play a Dewdrop Fairy.
Sure.
But if a player wanted to do that and they were cool with it, I probably wouldn't change their mechanics without talking out what they want changed as they go on. If they wanted to be visually a hobgoblin, but keep the goblin mechanics, we'd probably want to trade out Fury of the Small just because it's a lot less useful now. Mm-hmm. But aside from that, yeah, fine. If you want to keep your starting stat adjustments, I'm not going to fuck your build up. That's rude. That's shitty DMing.
Sure.
But the trading out the race features for the hobgoblin race features, and then you get bigger, I don't see that that's a problem because they're actually incredibly well balanced against one another, which I really like.
This brings up a subtopic. I kind of want to go into this for just a second, and then we can get into the the wrap-up question of how would you play this and how would you implement this.
Well, before that, is there anything you specifically don't like about Goblinoids? I feel like we sort of skated past just on my end.
I kind of mentioned it earlier. It was in brief, though. I don't care that they're connected.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, it's basically why this seems extraneous.
Yeah,
sort of.
I mean, like,
and it is. It's an extraneous detail left over from earlier editions.
Right. Do all hobgoblins have to hang out with goblins? Can goblins not be anything without hobgoblins? You guys don't even really make them, like, culturally similar. Why are they together? Bugbears and goblins I get.
Yeah.
Like, the default Dungeons and Dragons, meh, goblin, I understand why they would hang out with bugbears. Hobgoblins, I can't imagine them wanting to have anything to do with those fucks.
Yeah, either of them, really.
Yeah.
But
maybe employ some bugbears as, like, super low-level guards or mooks or something.
Or, like, as the big muscle.
Yeah, sure.
But, yeah, no, that's why you get ideas like, goblins get important and become hobgoblins, who get more important and become the big... They're greenskins. That's the idea of making them greenskins.
Sure.
The gubbins is the strongest, gets the biggest.
Yeah, exactly. I don't hate it. Like, if I went into someone's setting and they were like, oh, some goblins with a bugbear. All right, I'm not going to flip the table.
But, like, yeah, it's extraneous detail.
I wouldn't do it.
I've found a way to use it that I like, but it is extraneous detail entirely.
Sure. So the thing I wanted to just briefly, cul-de-sac through, when I was younger and I ran and played in a lot of D&D games, we had a lot of wizards with experimental potions or strange magical artifacts. There was a lot more race changing that went on. And I know a lot of this was inspired by some old adventure games on the computer, the text-based ones.
Zork and such, yeah.
Even before that, where you would go into a room and there'd be pools and it would change you into a different race and it would fuck with your starting stats. Part of the challenge of the computer game that I, as a young DM, and my friends, I'm sure similarly, didn't think about the connotations and ramifications of having somebody race change in the middle of the game.
You fucked up my build, homie.
Pretty much, yeah. But at the same time, it is an interesting concept.
Essentially, for me, having DM'd a game where someone had to change races, because I've got a druid who absolutely took the first opportunity to cast reincarnate he could find and ran with it, and has spent and has stated on several occasions an intent to get the Warforged killed so he can reincarnate him into something made of meat. But because I have that player, I've had to think about it. And it is... Basically, it's one of those things that I would never force on a player character because it is a big thematic commitment.
Sure, I agree entirely, but I would love to have the opportunity to either be that player or DM for that player. Someone who wanted to do it. Like, I don't know how one would broach the subject, I guess. Maybe you guys have been dealing with a mad wizard for a while. He gives you jobs, and that's the only reason you haven't figured out how to kill him yet. That, and he's probably too powerful. So you're keeping at arm's length, but doing stuff for him. And they're like, I'm kind of tired of my race. I wish I fit in more, or blah, 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 blah. Could I change it? I think that'd be really interesting. I think it'd be an interesting arc, a theme to go through. And
Well, you know what? As an example, I am currently going to be playing in a future campaign whenever the current situation has cleared up and we can finish our current ones. Grumble. I'm going to be playing a human samurai. Mm-hmm. I don't give a shit that he's human.
Right.
That was made entirely because I roll stats, and I rolled all odd numbers, so there's only really one choice that I could justify to myself mechanically.
Right.
So, with that in mind, if there's a story opportunity to change his race without fucking up my mechanics, I'm all for it.
Okay, that's interesting. It seems to me like a very old fantasy trope, like something in the 70s and 80s that kind of fell out of favor for young people coming into power or everything is hard.
Well, I wouldn't even call it an old trope. It's more like it's one of those universal tropes that's kind of out of favor right now.
Yeah, I guess that's kind
but
of
like
what I meant.
the human, it's the fucking hero with 1,000 faces. That's the transformation.
Sure.
You come back changed. That change can be you have taken on, you have become part of the Fae. You have taken on, magic powers and you're different now. As recent as the fucking Aragon books, the main character became basically an elf by the end of the series because he did so much magic.
And I was just spurred into thinking about that. What an interesting concept. You begin human, and if you're a Fey Pact Warlock, you begin human, say by level 5, you're a half-elf now.
And then
level 10, you're a full elf now. That's wild.
Level 15? Eladrin time, my dude.
Yeah, sure, why not? That's some cool thinking. So,
like, if we had thought about that 14 levels ago, Nicholas being an Eladrin by this point would make perfect sense.
Sure, yeah, that would be really cool. So there's some ideas out there for you, and that's exactly kind of the reason I wanted to talk about that stuff, because it's weird to like, we don't have those ideas to sit down and go, let's do a podcast about changing races, because it would be that last 10 minutes and then us going, and maybe telling stories for a while. But I like to explore those concepts when they come up. So thank you for indulging me on that. Both you, my talking partner, and you, the listener out there. Let's roll this goblinoid train to its stop at, I don't know, Money Station. We've mostly talked about how we would use goblinoids in our worlds, how we do use them.
I'm a DM first in my brain.
Sure. So I don't think that needs commenting on right now. But let's say to play one of each, real soft. You don't have to go into a lot of detail. How would you want to play a goblin, hobgoblin, and a bugbear?
I would play a bugbear as one of the rogue subclasses that is, like, beefier.
Okay.
Or maybe one of the other classes that is rogue.
Right.
Like your rogue monk or whatever. Mm-hmm. And just have them be like not dumb, but the muscle. Like, the audience won't much get this, but it's the only quick way I have to describe it. What Juntai was before he decided to strike out on his own. Just the dragon.
Sure. I think I would go a little bit more specifically for bugbear along the lines of a brigand. The kind of person, similar to what you're talking about, rogue with muscle, someone who would rob you along the road.
Yeah.
I mean, not necessarily in deed, but, kind of shadowy, kind of skulky.
Just clearly kind of a scummy dude who happens to be hanging out with all these other people and doesn't really feel like fighting the town guards right now.
Yeah.
That's me for a bugbear.
In that sense, though, I mean, you want to get real hairy, there's a Chewbacca right there.
Yeah, I mean, like, I could totally do Chewbacca. Just speak only Goblin, only my rogue friend knows how to speak Goblin.
It'd be pretty sick. You get that extra bonus when you pop out and scare somebody. Nice stuff.
Do a big roar, shoot them, and they kill my friend. For a hobgoblin, there's basically a fighter.
Definitely.
I don't know what kind. Almost all kinds are available, but some kind of fighter.
I think you could probably also do like an earth sorcerer or one of the more...
like a warcaster wizard.
Yeah, a warcaster would be great. One of the paladins that's less about good and more about like freedom or vengeance or something like
conquest.
that. Conquest, sure.
But yeah, I think that just some very martial something or other.
Yeah. Just an air of authority I think they should have.
And I would definitely play up I would take time to sit down before playing the character and decide, all right, this hobgoblin, what's important to him? What's a part of his code? What will he do? What will he not? And just, I would totally be willing to lose that character to follow that code.
Yeah.
If it's one of those situations where that's not my character, that's not what my character would do, then it's not. He leaves and I play somebody else.
Yeah, I felt really good about those times when a character has to leave a party for that reason. Like, not for the party. I feel bad that, they lose somebody who was
and lose character development and relationship development.
But that's the best reason to lose a character, from my interpretation, is no, they're not going to follow you into this madness you're doing, or no, even though what you're doing is a better idea, they have their principles.
And I would be honest with the other players about that right up front, but just so that they don't get too attached, essentially, sure. Because he would also be an asshole. He's a hobgoblin, so there will come a point where he's like, "No, we're not letting these people live. They tried to murder us." What are you talking about?
That also opens the door for 19 levels later, and
they come back as a villain,
or he's still there.
Yeah.
And then that's like, okay, I came in and I said, don't worry about this character, don't get too attached. But at the end of the day, He's still here. Maybe his principles have changed because of the influence of the party. Maybe they haven't, and the party's changed because of him.
It's just a different, interesting thing.
It creates some interesting vibes.
For a goblin, I'm honestly not sure. Because of the three, your brain goes to rogue. Like, small, sneaky, but that's not really there's not really anything in their kit, aside from, I guess, the bonus to Dex, that really says rogue to me. They don't, like, the Fury of the Small isn't necessarily a rogue trait, so on and so forth. So, like, I'd either probably make some kind of caster, or I would make, if I did a martial class that wasn't rogue, it almost would have to be, like, monk.
Okay.
Just because that's what's, like, left.
It can be hard to think of smaller races as the big, heavy-hitting classes. Just because you go paladin, that's a tall person in armor, and it is a goblin, and he's not tall.
And, like, that's fun, but that's an inherently comedic concept to me.
It's hard to overcome the comedy of it. And you have to do it with a big presence, but in that sense, like, you're going to have that dissonance. If you're talking tall and, walking hard, the rest of your party might have a hard time remembering you're a goblin or disassociating themselves from the fact that you are a goblin. That you are talking down the group of enemies you're coming into, or being very authoritative at 2 feet tall.
It's an inherently comedic concept that it's not worth it to try and fight, is for me.
It's an uphill battle. I agree entirely.
And if I'm going to play the kind of person who you would need to be to have that uphill battle, I can just as easily strap that person onto a different race and have a much easier time playing the character I want to play. It's an uphill battle that just is inherently not sort of worth it for me.
Of course, there's, the idea of leaning into the skid. Like you said, having the chip on their shoulder, like the goblins specifically do.
And, like, just going for the absolute highest damage output barbarian I can make.
Oh, yeah, hell yeah. It'd actually be really cool for a goblin.
And, like, I would go, like, whatever, like, not bear totem, not tank barbarian. Like, whatever highest damage output barbarian, I would theory craft the absolute murder wizard of barbarians, and I would play that as a goblin. And just have, any time you mention that he's short, it is time to rage, and it is time to fuck up something.
That's really good, actually. I really like that. What the fuck is his name? Edward Elric?
Yeah, Edward Elric powers. Here's the problem, and here's why I don't play that character, and here's why I never have. Because that's fucking Scrappy-Doo.
That's fair.
And so it would be...
I think it can be played better. I think that's an unfair comparison. Accurate, but I think in spirit you can definitely... Like, that's his trigger. Like, they shoulder up to you and crouch down real low and go, what are you going to do about it, Tiny? And you go...
What are you going to do about it, Tiny? And giving the other players the opportunity to go...
Yeah.
Like, to do the breath suck in. And he, like, has, like a toothpick in his mouth, and he just rolls it to the other side of his mouth. You really shouldn't have said that. And then he rips off the dude's legs and beats him to death with them.
Oh, I like that, actually. Keep that in your back pocket, my friend.
Will do.
I want to go, like, nature associated. Like, there's part of me that wants to do, like, ranger or druid.
Yeah, you can easily do that.
Yeah, like a goblin and his hunting buddy. That'd be a cool ranger. Or,
I mean, with that, do like a ranger with like the revised ranger beastmaster. Mm-hmm. Get something you can ride.
Hell yeah, dude. Sized. Hell yeah.
Get a wolf.
Yeah.
Ride the wolf.
Yeah.
That's cool as shit.
Yeah. It feeds really well into all their stuff, being like kind of, culturally skulky and wild, Druid's a little fun too, because it's one of the few times where I can go, why would I want to be a wolf? Oh yeah.
They're big.
I'm the size of a football.
So
bear me up, brah.
So I will get great big and be a regular wolf.
So.
And then eventually, if you go high enough level druid, I am a small-sized goblin. I will now turn into a large-sized direwolf or this gargantuan-sized brontosaurus and stomp on you. Like, just, what are you gonna do? Go away. Go away before I stomp you into the floor, Tiny. Turns into Brontosaurus. leans down. You were saying, motherfucker?
Minor key version of Jurassic Park theme starts playing. So that's Goblinoids.
Yeah, I think that was a good one.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks for joining us as always. If there's not pizza in your heart, there should be pizza in your mouth.
That's our sign off now. I'm serious. Everything's better when nerds talk about it.